In question time today, we had to wait more than an hour for somebody to bowl up a question that the Prime Minister didn't want to answer and did his best not to answer. And it relates to something I've been talking about for months on this show, which is that when the government has a surplus of $20 billion, they could spend $3 billion of that cutting your petrol taxes for the next 6 months by 25 cents. Obviously, double those numbers either in 50 cents for 6 months or, of course, 25 cents for 12 months, and they've still got plenty of money left over to say, we've got a surplus, keep voting for us. Well, Di Lee was the one who took up this fight directly to the Prime Minister, of course, the independent member for Fowler, somebody who I think will be one of many Labor heartland seats that may well end up going independent before they go anywhere else, because they talk about what their constituents truly care about, including this question from Di Lee to the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister, families are paying over $2 per litre at the pump today, which is increasing costs and inflation across the supply chain. It's one of the reasons interest rates has increased, which is hurting working Australians immensely. Fuel prices will go up and down, but a cut to fuel excise would lower costs and reduce inflation now. Why won't the government reduce the fuel excise at a time it has a budget surplus and provide instant cost of living and mortgage relief to families, especially in Western Sydney?
Perfect. Excellent. One of the reasons why this is the right thing to do is that it's not like cutting a cheque for $500 and sending it out to everyone, meaning they've got extra money they didn't already have. This is about making sure that the blood that runs through the veins of our supply chain could be ever so slightly cheaper. It's more than $2 in many parts of the country. And remember, Anthony Albanese thought it was an outrage when it was $1.80. Now, yes, the price of fuel is something that's affected by international events. The tax that the federal government makes off it, and remember, the higher the price, the more the cost per litre, meaning the 40% of your fuel that goes on tax, well, all of it ends up with extra revenue for the government. But this can be foregone because they have the budget surplus. They'll most likely have another budget surplus next year. Now, if it was a Liberal who asked the question, the Prime Minister changes the subject, doesn't want to answer it. He'll never get asked that question by his own side, and the media, for whatever reason, perhaps because we talk about it on this show as frequently as we do not want to raise this as a legitimate, easy thing that must be done by the government to give relief to everyone, from truckies to tradies, from mums, the unemployed, and anyone who uses their car to get around, which is, of course, basically all Australians. Well, the Prime Minister had to kind of answer the question, but listen to the gobbledygook when he knows it's a good idea but has to come up with a bad excuse why he shouldn't do the right thing.
When it comes to the issue of petrol indexation, one of the concerns that is there in the economy, and including from the Reserve Bank, that feeds into interest rates, is how much cash there is in the economy as well. So we have purposefully targeted cost of living relief.
Now remember, the policy that I'm suggesting, the one that Di Lee asked the Prime Minister about, does not put extra money into the economy. It just means you have the same amount of money that you got either from your boss, from working from them, from yourself because you have your own business, or from the government because of welfare, but just a small amount that slowly but surely builds up over time means that you have greater capacity to pay the bill that is petrol. It's nothing the government can't afford. It's just something the government doesn't want to do because it wasn't their idea, and they want to bank the biggest surplus possible, not to pay off debt, but to be able to get away with the increasing in spending, which the government's very own intergenerational report promises to go forever upwards for the next 40 years, while the deficits get worse every year for the next 40 years. Well, Di Lee, of course, realising that the Prime Minister was not answering the question, and the very specific question about a 25 cent a litre drop for at least 6 months, that's the obvious option here, well, she stood back up on her feet to try to ask the Prime Minister to answer her specific question.
Add measures to...
The Prime Minister will pause. There's far too much noise. The member for Fowler on a point of...
So she's ready to ask the question again, put the pressure back on the Prime Minister, but then look what each way Albo does.
The Prime Minister's concluded his answer.
He just doesn't have to keep answering the question. So the question that the media won't report on, the Prime Minister gives a gobbledy-nothing answer so it doesn't look like a mistake, a gaffe, something that question time would become about. And rather than answering the specific question after he's changed the subject and put out his own world of misinformation that would fail his own censoring of the internet test, which you notice has now been delayed until next year, he simply doesn't answer the question. My suggestion to the crossbench tomorrow is to keep asking the question. My suggestion to the opposition tomorrow is to keep asking the question. Because at some point, the people who are sitting and paid to report on politics full time will actually have to notice that it's a good idea, one they can afford, but for some reason the pig-headedness of the Prime Minister means they just won't do. Meantime, as for the overall issues when it comes to the economy right now, the problems of inflation, and remember, petrol is part of the basket of goods that the ABS look at to work out whether inflation is rising month after month after month or quarter after quarter. And remember, while the overall inflation rate for the country is about 5 and a bit percent, petrol is close to 20%. Therefore, a reduction in its overall price would, help inflation. You get my point here.